that with this one, ooh, sorry. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's very exciting to be sitting down in front of the camera again and filming a new video. I'm filming on my phone today, so I hope the quality is just as good. I've done this because I've actually lost the charger for my camera. It's somewhere in the house, but we've been doing a few renovation things recently, and so it's got misplaced somewhere. So we're doing it on the phone, which means that hopefully everything will go fine, and I think it should be good enough quality. I mean, iPhones are pretty much like great quality now, aren't they? And loads of people film on their phones, so I don't feel too bad. So I'm not going to do too much of an interview for this video, hopefully, because we have got a stack. We've got a stack of books to get through today. Look at that! Look at how many books we've got to get through. That's a bit of a sneak peek actually for you of what we're going to be discussing today. December. So you will know from the title, this is what I read in December. I am aware we're on the 5th of February by now. Yeah, so January was. I needed to take the month out really in January because I felt like 2020, I kind of flew by the seat of my pants in terms of content creation. I wasn't really thinking ahead, I wasn't planning, I was just kind of squeezing videos in as and when I could do them. I did plan out NaNoWriMo and I did plan out Vlogmas, but I did like 4 Vlogmas videos and I wanted to do 6. So I think you could tell last year that I wasn't really thinking strategically about my video content. That's one thing I want to do better this year. I want to be more strategic with YouTube and I want to grow my audience on Instagram as well. So if you don't follow my Instagram, I'm going to do some snazzy editing and put the feed up to the right of me here. So if you don't follow me on Instagram, please do, because one of the exciting things that I'm going to be doing on Instagram over the next 6 months is I'm actually going to be doing live videos over there. Every month, at the end of every month, I'm going to be doing like a live that is, you know, an hour, a couple of hours long, where I just jump on Instagram Live. We talk about how the month's been. We talk about everything: books, life, freelance work, writing, creative projects, mental health, topical issues in the news. It's just a real opportunity for me to be able to speak to you directly, because obviously you can submit comments and we can chat via the IG Live chat feature. It's something that I really want to do for this year. I want to connect more with you guys. I want to be able to have a two-way conversation rather than me just talking at a camera. And I want to get to know you a bit more. I want to know what you want to see from me. You know, what kind of content is really exciting, what inspires you, I've got hair. All that kind of stuff. So please do join me on Instagram. Join me for those lives. Like I said, they'll be every month. They will be probably at the beginning of the following month. So I'm not doing one for January because I did a live over on Instagram kind of a couple of weeks ago. So I'm not doing one to wrap up January, but I will be doing a live to wrap up my February and how February goes. So that will probably be like 1st, 2nd, 3rd of March, because obviously I need to finish the month in order to look back and talk about the month. So yeah, roughly kind of like the 1st, 2nd, 3rd of each month for the next few months, we'll be doing a kind of catch up, wrap up live on Instagram. So follow me there. Here on YouTube, I am going to be committing to 1 video a fortnight for the next 6 months. That's not as much content as some people put out on YouTube, but I have to be realistic. I do work 9 to 5. Monday to Friday on my kind of freelance work, all of my different clients and contracts and stuff. And I am writing my 3rd book at the moment. I've just started the research for that. So I have to fit YouTube and kind of content creation in around that. But one of my commitments to be more strategic and thinking better with my YouTube, and when I say thinking strategically, it's not like I'm not like being calculating with it. It's just I want to think about content that I know that you guys like, and I want to plan it, and I want to be more kind of, I want it to be better content basically. So that's what I want to do. And I think that if I say to myself, right, every fortnight I need to be publishing a video on YouTube, I can plan my other work around it. I can say, right, okay, today. So today, for example, it's a Friday, it's It's 10:34, I've got a meeting at 11, so I know now I've got half an hour to get this video filmed. I can go into my meeting and then I can come back later today and I can edit this video and make it all nice and then publish it. So that's what I'm doing. So we've talked for nearly 6 minutes. That's all I'm going to talk about with that. If you want to know more, then add a comment in the comment section of this video or DM me over on Instagram and we can have a chat about it, because obviously, you know, I'm open to feedback and talking about the channel and letting me know, yeah, what you want to see. So let's jump into this. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've read 7 books in December. And the reason for this was that I actually did the 12-hour readathon challenge, which you will know about if you watch my last video. And I actually ended up doing that video twice because the first video that I did, the footage didn't come out very well. So that's why I read more books, because I basically read for 24 hours in December, just read. And then I read other stuff around it at other times as well. And it was Christmas and we were all chilling a bit more. And so I had more time to read. So I'm probably not going to be able to go into as much like in-depth detail on each book as I would normally. But if there's a book within this kind of video that you have read and you've resonated with yourself, or you want to know more information about, let me know, because what I can do is I can do more of an in-depth review, maybe on Instagram, and we can go into a specific book and we can do like an IGTV video on there. So let's get started. I'm going to go chronologically, so from the beginning of December through to the end. And we started the month with Dominicana by Angie Cruz. And this book is one that it wasn't even on my radar, to be honest. And then there's an Instagram account that I follow called Jeanette Actually, and she's a book blogger and an Instagrammer, and she's really into literature and heritage and all that kind of stuff. And she started a book club on Facebook, and this was the first book in the book club. And so I picked it up because I wanted to be able to discuss it at her book club. But actually, I am so glad that she recommended it, because it's absolutely phenomenal. I really, really enjoyed it. So it's basically about a young woman called Anna who is born in the Dominican, and she gets married to a man called Juan Ruiz, and they move to New York City. And she's like 15 when she marries him. She doesn't particularly want to marry him. It's kind of like she's forced into the marriage by her family, mostly by her mother. And it's seen as a way for her to be able to help her family immigrate into New York City. And it's Anna's the person who has to do that on behalf of her family. So she goes to New York at the age of 15, and she basically lives inside the apartment that she moves to with her new husband, who she doesn't know. He's a stranger to her, really. And it's kind of about how she copes in that apartment and how she finds like little ways to cope in day-to-day life. And it's not a particularly positive book at the beginning, because it's kind of dealing with issues around forced consent and the inability to give consent, and that kind of relationship between a husband and a wife when the marriage has been put together for reasons other than kind of romance and love. So it kind of explores those topics, but then it also looks at what it is like for somebody who, you know, doesn't speak English, American English, and comes to, say, New York City, and how she has to learn basically to live in this brand new country, you know, shopping for food, just going outside, even just like being in an urban space as opposed to the Dominican, where it was much more rural where she was living. So I found it really interesting for that perspective, because it's the first narrative that I've read from a non-American immigrant into America. I'm really going to be looking for more narratives like this, because it was really interesting. I learned about different cultures and different people's experiences of immigration, which I don't know, I haven't experienced that. So it was really good for my own education in that topic. It's also set in the 60s, which again it's not an area of kind of historical literature that I ever really read. But again, this one and another book that I read were both set in the 60s, and I really enjoyed them. There's some really beautiful moments where Anna, the main character, kind of compares her life in America to her life in the Dominican, and I really love the way that Cruz wrote it. She basically writes in these kind of like tiny paragraphs. So, not tiny paragraphs, sorry, tiny chapters. So like this one here, this page, is like one entire chapter in a page. And I really liked that because it kept the pace moving quite fast. You kind of do fall into the trap of thinking that this book like spans a number of years. And yet I think it only spans about 18 months in total. And I think that's because of the pace of the narrative and the way that Cruz has written it. But I did really like the little paragraphs. Another thing with those kind of small chapter things is that it made me almost feel like Cruz had written these little scenes and kind of was using them in like flexibly throughout the book. So she might like write a page, like a scene where Anna is thinking about the Dominican and she's comparing like what her food was like in America and how she's able to make food here and what kind of a standard meal at home would have been like in the Dominican. And I could almost imagine that Anna sat down and wrote that, not Anna, sorry, Angie, sat down and wrote that scene and was like, right, at some point that will be perfect to insert into the narrative, but I'm not entirely sure where, because it does kind of feel like you're following the narrative and then all of a sudden there's this moment where there's a snapshot of kind of her, this comparative or this... It's really hard to explain without you actually going and reading it, but it's something that I liked. I'm not saying it's a negative thing because I actually really liked it and it made me think about my own writing kind of style and whether I could do the same, like write just some standalone scenes and then look at, you know, interspersing them throughout the narrative at some point. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. I hope that's not like plagiarism or anything like that. I'm just being inspired. I'm being inspired by Angie Cruz. So yeah, I loved that about the actual kind of the way that the narrative is physically written. And yeah, I think it's a really, really good book. I don't want to tell you what happens at the end, but I am really happy with how Angie Cruz ended it. I think it ended exactly the way it needed to. And on the front it says Dominicana feels so right for this moment, and I think that's really true. It feels like a really topical, even though it's set in the 60s, like I say, it does kind of feel relatable to today, and it's, you know, it's quite current. I think a lot of the kind of issues and around like women's rights and consent and forced consent and just what it's like for somebody coming into America from another country. All of those topics are still just as relevant today as they were in the 60s, if not more so, given the political issues that have been going on over the last 4 years. So I think it's a really important book just for those reasons, just so that you can become aware of some of these social issues that are going on. It's a nice introduction to that topic. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. So Cruz has written 2 other books. I think I'm going to search them out and read them at some point in the future because I really like them. And yeah, I'm going to give this 5 out of 5. Thought it was outstanding. And yes, I highly recommend you go and read it. So the next book that I'm going to be moving on to is The Emperor of Paris by C.S. Richardson. And I love the book cover on this one. I love the kind of... what's it called when you have like cutouts of card? I can't think what it's called, but I have a picture like this that I was actually bought for a friend for my wedding, and I love that design. So yeah, it doesn't hint anything at what's going on in the book really, but it's still a very pretty book cover. And I picked this up for 20p from the library. Like I've said before, I pick up books at the library when they're selling them, when they're getting rid of them. And it's basically set in Paris, and it kind of spans a period from kind of 1900 up to kind of 1920. It kind of jumps and changes about in timelines quite a bit, and it's the story of it's kind of hard to say, but it's a narrative about the son of a baker and a young woman who come together because of lots of really random little twists and turns of fate. And it's a romance, but it's like the most uncheesy romance book you could ever find. It's really intricate, and it's a romance book that almost takes away the two central characters from the romance, if you understand what I mean. So Octavio is the gentleman, that's the young lad that's in it, and Isabeau is the young girl, and they meet and they fall in love. But there's also like his father features quite heavily in it. Oh, what's happening with my screen? Yeah, so Isabeau is the girl, but there's lots of kind of bits of narrative that include like Octavio's father and his story, and that Isabeau's parents and the neighbours, and it's kind of, and there's also a painter and a bookseller. There's lots of like kind of like extraneous characters that are, I don't know, it's really hard to describe. It's basically like a book that brings the background characters into the foreground and moves the foreground characters into the background, but tells the same story. So it's like, what would a love story be like if the kind of random meet cute moments were in the foreground of a narrative? And that's what this is like. So it's a really beautiful book. It's written really beautifully. There are some moments where C.S. Richardson writes, just plays with language, and I really like books that do that. It's a little bit hard to get into, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's only 270 pages long, and it did take me kind of the first 60 pages to really get into it. And that's because the narrative jumps around quite a lot, and you're like, oh, well, who's this and who's this and who's this? But if you persevere with it past the kind of first 50 pages, you really get into the narrative, and it is really beautiful. At the back it says, you know, I adore this book. This is a kind of a little review on the back. It says it's fragile and beautiful. It aches with romance. It's for art lovers, book lovers and francophiles. It tells its tale quietly and splendidly. I think that's a really beautiful description. It really is. If you love France and if you love Paris, I think this book will be for you. It really is a lovely book. I've not read anything by C.S. Richardson before, but I will be looking out for more stuff by them in the future, and diving into a couple of their books. So I'm going to give this, I think, a 3 out of 5. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. I just think that because it took me quite a while to get into, and because of the slight difference in the way that it was constructed, it was one of those kind of a little bit more of a thinking book than you just sit back and fall into the narrative. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5, but it's like a strong 3. It's a very, very good book. And like I say, if you like Paris, if you like France, if you like books, if you like art, if you like bread, then this will be quite a nice book for you to jump into. So that was the first book that I read in the 12-hour readathon that didn't make it into the world. And the second book that I read in that readathon was Tidelands by Philippa Gregory. And this book is a completely new kind of collection for her. You may know a lot of her books focus on like royal courts and kings and queens and princes and princesses and all that kind of stuff, from like the War of the Roses all the way up to the Elizabethan period. So this book is actually set in 1648, and the collection moves forward from then, so from 1648 up into the late 1600s. So it's a new period of time for her to be writing in, and it's kind of a completely different style of narrative. It's not at a court, it's not dealing with excessively rich people. The main character of Tidelands, who's called Eleanor, is actually a really poor woman, and she is living on her own, and she's living on these beautiful marshlands down on the south coast of England. And she basically, her husband has left her, and she's living on her own, raising her 2 children in this tiny kind of cottage on the coast. Like I say, she's in this kind of marshland, and I mean, it sounds beautiful. It sounds absolutely amazing. I would love to live in a cottage on the marshes. I'm sure the damp and the weather and the cold and all that kind of stuff would not be as romantic as you think. But given that yeah, I've been looking for some strong escapism in the last couple of months, and this book certainly gave it me with the setting. But yeah, she's living in this cottage, and she's also a bit of like a healer. She practices midwifery for the local town, and so yeah, she's a very strong female character. And of course, around this time, the mid 1600s, was when the witch hunting trials were going on. The Malleus Maleficarum book, which was written by James the First, I think. No, his was a different one, wasn't it? There was James the First wrote some kind of book about witches and witchcraft and how to spot a witch, and then the Malleus Maleficarum was written again, another treatise on how to discover witches and how to find out if someone's a witch and what to do with them. So there was, you know, witchcraft and wise women and that kind of thing were really kind of in the forefront of people's minds, and it's kind of there as a threat throughout the whole of this book. There's moments where she'll do something and either a family member or someone in the kind of local village will be like, oh, that's magic, that is, and she'll be like, no, it's not magic, I'm just healing with herbs or whatever. So it's like there is a constant threat throughout the whole book, and it's kind of a romance and kind of just a general book about small village life. So Eleanor meets a priest who is a Catholic runaway priest, and they kind of start this romance, but it's all very hush-hush and hidden. He's trying to help the... is it King Charles I? Yes, it will be. So he's basically on the side of King Charles I. He's trying to help him. He's in exile, and he's very much for the royalist cause, but is kind of hiding, in hiding and kind of doing all of that work. I think this is set just after the end of like the main civil war, but it's before he's executed, before Charles I is executed. So Charles I's execution does actually form part of the narrative of this book. So if you're kind of interested in the Civil War, in what England was like around the time of the English Civil War, and what the people thought, and how the kind of common man felt about the Civil War, then it's a really interesting book, because I do feel like when we talk about narratives about the Civil War, it's always country house owners, the royalists, and for me, I've not really come across that many narratives which is about like what caused the Civil War in the beginning from like the common man's perspective. So I liked that. But overall, I was absolutely loving this book. It was escapism, it was life on a marsh in the 1600s, there was plant picking, there was chicken feeding and fishing and all loads of beautiful kind of narrative elements about the landscape. And then it got to the end and I was so disappointed. And I don't want to tell you why, but basically something happens right at the end of the book, and somebody who is the instigator of all of the problems, all of the issues, the reason why there is this huge event that happens at the end of the book is because of this one person being very selfish and not thinking about others. And basically at the end, that person doesn't get their comeuppance. They don't get any kind of punishment. They ride off into the distance with Eleanor and that's it. And I was like, well, all of this shit has gone down. Sorry, I'm swearing, but you know. All of this stuff's gone down because of this one person's selfishness. Are they going to be punished? What's going to happen? So I kind of finished it and I was like, that was disappointing. And I also felt the end was very rushed. I felt like it needed like an extra 20, 30 pages just to kind of slow it down a little bit, that pace of the narrative at the end, and also to have a little bit of time afterwards to talk about that kind of what happened at the end. So yeah, I was a little bit disappointed with that. I was disappointed with how it ended. But it was the first of a series, and I bought this like way back in 2018, and I thought to myself, well, I know that the next one in the series, which is called Dark Tides, and I'm looking down here because I actually read it in December, I knew that Dark Tides had come out, so I ordered it, and I thought, well, I'll start reading the next one in December and I'll see what happens to this character, because maybe Philippa Gregory is just saying, well, wait until the next book. In the next book, she gets her comeuppance. So I picked up the next one And we're going to talk about the next one in a minute, but I'm going to finish off with this one first. So, if the ending had been better, I probably would have given this a 4 or a 5 out of 5, but I think I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 5 because, for me, there were just a couple of bits that were a bit odd and didn't quite work, but those would have been forgiven if the ending had been better. So, yeah, I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Still think it's worth reading, especially if you like Philippa Gregory's other stuff. If you're looking for something that's got a good amount of escapism and will completely take you to somewhere different at the moment, given what's going on in our world at the moment, I don't blame you, then I do highly recommend it. And let me know if you have the same escapist feelings if you do read it, because, yeah. As a result of reading this and a couple of the other books in this series, I have basically been watching videos on YouTube of going into a cabin, building a cabin in the woods, living in a van, buying an island in the middle of nowhere, and all that kind of stuff, because it's really sparked, I think, being stuck in your house in lockdown in a pandemic, it's given me a real urge to get out into the wild outdoors and like be just at one with nature, which sounds incredibly kind of weird, but that's kind of how I'm feeling at the moment after nearly 12 months of lockdowns and staying at home. So yeah, that will help. I think this book will help a little bit. So yeah, let me know what you think. 3 out of 5 for Philippa Gregory's Tidelands. The next book that I read was Where the Crawdads Sing. Everyone has read this book, and I can 100% see why. When it was first doing the rounds and everyone was talking about reading it, I was a bit like, I don't know, will it be something that I'm interested in? And yeah, I bought it because everyone else was reading it and I wanted to know what the hype was about. And I can absolutely 100% say that I completely get why there was so much hype about it. It is one of the best books I have read in a long time. It really is. It's completely different to any of my other favourite books, but it's just beautifully written. It's just absolutely beautifully written. So it's about a young girl called Kaya Clark who lives in a cabin out on the marshes in somewhere called Barclay Cove, which is on the North Carolina coast. And she's in this kind of marsh area. It's very rural, even though it's quite close to it, like a small town. It's considered quite rural, and people who live in the marshes and live in the woods and stuff are almost treated as like second-class citizens to the town folk. And she lives there with her mum, dad, and her brothers and sisters. But very quickly, within like the first few pages, within the first page, her mum leaves. And then her brothers and sisters all leave, and eventually her father leaves her as well. And she's only like 8 when her mother leaves and her brother. And her they leave because the father's quite abusive and he drinks and this, that and the other, and he's quite, it's not a nice home environment. But when the brother leaves, kind of 8-9-year-old Kaya is left at this cabin on her own, completely on her own really, because her dad's like, he turns up sometimes and sometimes he's gone for like weeks at a time and this, that and the other. And eventually he disappears and he never comes back. So I think when she's maybe like 10, maybe even a bit younger, she ends up living completely on her own in this cabin and kind of just survives through... Well, at first she kind of eats what's in the house, then she has a little bit of cash, I think, from when her father does initially come back. He will leave her a few coins to go and get some food so she can go into the town and buy oats and very, very simple food, and she lives off minimal stuff. But then she starts to realise that she can't really rely on her father's income, so she does things like she'll catch local fish, and she takes them to a gentleman who sells fuel. I think it looks like he has a bit like a petrol station type gig, in the marsh, so that the boatmen and the kind of the vessels can come and they can be refuelled at the station. And she takes them to him and she sells them to him, and she makes a little bit of money that way, and she does other kind of stuff to get some money. And it's basically her kind of story about how she grows up and what she does to survive, how she copes and how she survives in this kind of wild area. It's also very, very much about kind of social inequality and how the town completely, like, I mean, they call her the marsh girl and they treat her like she's some kind of like urchin that is mucky and dirty and doesn't deserve to be talked to, and don't let the children play with her because she might catch something from her. And but there are some like really beautiful moments where she makes some really beautiful connections. So the man who runs the petrol station on the marsh, he's a black man and he's kind of marginalised because he's from the black community that live nearby Barclay Cove, and they're kind of this, I think they're seeing each other, that sense of being other within a community, and Kaya doesn't judge him and he doesn't judge Kaya, and they have this beautiful relationship that lasts all the way through. And he's obviously quite a bit older, he's like a father to her, he becomes almost like her surrogate father, and he helps her out, and his wife helps Kaya out and give her like clothes and this, that and the other, and they make out that she's basically buying them for in exchange for like fish and stuff, but in reality it's just like the local community are just kind of, there's people who are like rallying round after Kaya. Even though quite a lot of the town treat her as like a second-class citizen, there are people within the town that feel sorry for her and that want to do stuff for her. So she makes a relationship with him. She then has this this beautiful romantic relationship. Well, they kind of start out as friends when they're children and they become kind of romantic later when they become teenagers with a boy. And then unfortunately that classic thing where he goes off to university and he never comes back for her. And he tells her that he will do, and he never does, and she's heartbroken. You know, she's seen her mum leave, she's seen dad leave, she's seen everybody else leave, and he promised her that he would never do it, and then he did. And so there's things like that. There are some beautiful kind of relationships that she does have. And yeah, it's just absolutely beautiful. And it's another book that is real escapism. The way that Delia Owens talks about the marshes and like narrates them and talks about the cabin and how Kaya would go out on the water and she'd connect with nature, and Kaya collects feathers from birds and she becomes really, really knowledgeable. She becomes like an expert in the marsh and how the marsh works and the animals and the plants and the wildlife that are there, and just the descriptions of how she like finds the feathers and going out on the water. And I mean, you can't get away from the fact that it is pretty harrowing. You know, it's a 10-year-old girl that's been left in the woods on her own to survive. But at the same time, there's this kind of almost beautiful escapism to it. And I don't want that to come across as ignorant, because I'm not ignoring the fact that it is a pretty weird, a pretty harrowing kind of storyline. But I did really enjoy getting into a narrative that was based in nature again. I'm pretty sure that nearly everyone who will watch this video has read Where the Crawdads Sing. But if you haven't, then definitely go pick up a book. Go and get it, because you will not regret reading it. You won't. It's absolutely phenomenal. All I can say about it, I would actually give this a 6 out of 5 because I thought it was that amazing. So yeah, absolutely outstanding. And yeah, there we go. Oh, so the end of Where the Crawdads Sing did feature in my 12-hour readathon. So I was kind of right at the end. I think I had like that much left when I started the 12-hour readathon. So that was the first book that I read as part of that 12-hour thing. So if you haven't watched my 12-hour readathon, I'll put a little sticker up on the top, and go and have a look on my channel. It was the last video that I published before this one. And yeah, we read that. And then I moved on to this, which is a Wilkie Collins book. It's very, very short. It's called Miss or Mrs. And it's a short story about a young woman who is an heiress, and she's looking to marry. So she's in love with Lancelot, who is her cousin, but her father is trying to marry her off to a man called Richard, who really wants her dowry, doesn't really love her that much. She would be an accumulation for him rather than like a romantic partner. And it's just about how that pans out. You know, does she end up with Lancelot? Does she end up with Richard? it's nice and short. It is very short, and the reason that I picked a short book was because I knew that I was doing this 12-hour readathon and I wanted to kind of get through things quite quickly. It took me a few pages to get into it, as I think it always does with Victorian narratives, because it's written in a really different language, and it can be quite hard to get your head around how that language is written at the time. I think it's quite similar to, like, people say it a lot when they read like Austen novels, that it can be quite hard to get into the narrative of it because it's written obviously in a completely different dialect and tone that we write in than we write in today. So it did take me a good kind of 10 pages to get into it, but I really liked the storyline. I thought the storyline was brilliant, and I've said this before, I think that would make a really good like limited series. Maybe I should have a go at writing a script for it. I don't know, I've never even thought of script writing before, but I think it would make a really cool little limited series for TV. So yeah, I enjoyed it, and then there were a couple of little short stories in the back, and one of them was hilarious. I really enjoyed that. I like Wilkie Collins. I like the way that he writes, and yeah, looking forward to exploring more. So I'm going to give that like, don't know. In fact, I would find that hard to kind of rate really, because it's a short story. It's not really, I don't really feel like I can compare that to some of the like the richer, deeper narratives that we've discussed. But it's very good. I'm not going to rate it because I can't. But if you are interested in Victorian literature, in Wilkie Collins' stuff, then I do recommend it. Moving on, we then decided in the 12-hour readathon that we were going to read Bone China by Laura Purcell. Now, if you've watched any of my other book review videos, you will know that I am a bit of a fangirl when it comes to Laura Purcell. I love her books. I think they're absolutely fantastic. In fact, I think she's bringing out a new one. This is her third book, and it kind of goes back to the kind of country house, creaking country house, old, is it haunted, is there something going on, is it spooky, this, that and the other, that we had with The Silent Companions. It's completely different from The Corset. I don't think it's as good as The Corset, only because I just thought The Corset was absolutely phenomenal. It was a completely new narrative. This is kind of back to a kind of a well-worn genre, I would say, which is the kind of country house suspense, thriller, ghost narrative. Not to say there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I love myself a Victorian, a Gothic country house story. It's just, I think anything will struggle to compare with The Corset, to be honest, because it was so beautiful. But what I liked about this is that it's not, she doesn't just go back to a ghost in a country house. She finds these amazing ways to make the stories unique. So Louise Pinecroft is a woman who lives at this old house in Cornwall, and she basically, she and her father are the survivors of a family who has been ravaged by consumption, which is also known as TB. And basically her and her father, who is a doctor, have do these like weird experiments to try and cure tuberculosis, and the experiments include like living in a cave and all of the kind of weird and wonderful things that doctors did in the past to try and cure TB. And I'm really interested in that. You know that I like ghost stories and this, that and the other, and I'm sure that people, well, you may know, you may not know, there is a place in America called Waverly Hills Sanatorium, and it was a TB sanatorium. It was a place where somebody went if they had TB, and it was basically, this whole hotel was constructed on the idea that getting fresh air would help cure TB, and obviously we know it didn't, but I think it helped a little bit. And this is kind of on the same thread as Waverly Hills. It's kind of the idea that fresh air, seawater, and a few other things, can't remember all the different things that they do now, but that kind of experimental cure type of thing. And there's that going on in the background. Again, it's another one that kind of chops and changes time-wise between when Louise and her father were doing the experiments, and then a little bit further on in time to when Louise is a really old lady and she's being cared for by this woman called Hester, who comes from outside and is nursing Louise in her old age. And I thought it was, maybe I went through it a little bit too quickly, but I just didn't quite understand the role of some of the other characters in the book. It left me with a lot of questions as to what was actually happening all along. And I wonder if that might be quite purposeful with Purcell. It kind of leaves you thinking, well, is it this or is it that? Like, there's this whole thing about the fairies all the way through, and that fairies are going to like steal people, and they want like sacrifices in order to keep the world turning, and this, that and the other. And it's a bit fantastical, and then at the end something happens, and it's a bit like, I did like the ending because it was exactly what I thought was going to happen, but a lot of authors wouldn't have the kind of the bottle to go through with that as an ending. And I liked it, but I was a bit like, fairies. Can I quite put my mind into that area and believe in fairies? I'm not sure I can. And I think that's the only thing that did kind of, not a barrier, but it was the only thing that was a bit like, I can believe in ghosts. I have had paranormal experiences of my own to believe that something happens. There is something that is causing things to happen. I don't believe that death is the end, but I don't know what that represents after you die. But fairies, for me, it was a little bit of a stretch with the fairies, but the kind of the gothic kind of spookiness of the book was absolutely perfect. It was spot on, exactly what I wanted from another Laura Purcell book. I like the fact that with this one, I liked the fact that with this one and with the corset, the main character is almost like an anti-hero. She is very flawed, and Purcell's quite happy to explore those flaws in the main character. And I really liked that, because very often, you know, the main character's this like pure person who never does anything wrong and this, that and the other. But you know, the main character, Hester, you know, she drinks gin and actually takes quite a lot of opium throughout the course of the narrative, and is doing that for her own kind of reasons. It's a really good book. It's kind of hard for me to summarise, so if you want to know more about this book, let me know, and it's one that I could maybe go into a bit more detail on Instagram about. But yeah, I thought it was absolutely brilliant again. I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5, just because I don't think it quite matched up to the corset, but I did really enjoy it, and you guys know I love Laura Purcell. I think she's phenomenal. Love it. Bone China, go read it. It's great. Right, we're on to the final book now, guys. Thank you so much. If you've stuck around to this point in the video, then you have got so much of my gratitude. And you know, I know that I talk a lot, and I know that these videos are very lengthy, and yeah, I tell you what, if you've stuck around this far, put a book emoji in the comments, and then I know that you're a proper reading fan. Yeah, so the final book that I read for December was Dark Tides by Philippa Gregory. Now this is the one that leads on from Tidelands that I was talking about earlier in the video. And I bought this, like I say, as soon as I'd finished reading Tidelands, because I knew I wanted to move on to this one quite quickly and find out what happened to that character next. It's set a little bit later. What's the time period? 1670. So it's set about 20 years after the events of the first one. And unfortunately, we've moved from the marshlands. It's kind of got 3 settings really. There's one part of the narrative takes place in London, another part of the narrative actually takes place in Venice, and the third part of the narrative takes place in America. And the American bit really fulfilled my need for escapism and nature. But that takes place in New England. Yeah, so the main narrative in London, Eleanor has moved to London with her daughter and some children. I'm not going to say whose children or where the children feature, but there are 4 people living in a house in London, and basically they have set up a trading company where, as ships come into London on the Thames, they will stop, I think like a customs house, they will stop at the warehouse that Eleanor owns, and they offload their goods, and then I think Eleanor is responsible for basically holding those goods for a set amount of time before the person who owns those goods comes and collects them. I think that's how it works. And yeah, they've moved to London, her and her daughter, and they are making a moderate amount of money. They're comfortable, they're not rich, they're not poor. And they've lived in London for 20 years, and the children have grown up. They're now in their early 20s. And yeah, the book kind of, it gets the pace going really quickly. So it was very obvious very quickly that the person who was supposed to be punished at the end of book 1 was not punished in the interim period. And I thought, well, surely there's going to be a bit where they tell us what's happened, why, you know, what's happened in the interim, what did this person, punishment did this person get, what was the fallout of their behaviour? Nothing. So I was like, well, that wasn't what I expected. And then I thought, well, maybe throughout the course of the book, this person will get their comeuppance. Spoilers, they didn't. So I'm a little bit disappointed with the way that character was developed. And yeah, just a bit disappointed with that. So Eleanor's brother, Ned, who featured quite heavily in the first book, actually moves out to New England somewhere within this kind of interim period. So Charles II has been restored to the throne, and basically Ned leaves because he's like, I don't believe in monarchy, I don't believe in a country being ruled by a king, I want a country to be ruled, you know, democratically, so I'm going to move to New England and start again. And there's this beautiful kind of parallel narrative where Ned lives in New England and is trying to establish his life there. He's got this little house and a garden, and he tends his garden, and he's got a dog, and he's part of the community. But the thing that I loved about Ned was that he was very much part of the native community as well. I'm sure everybody knows about the kind of the way that the American country was started with, you know, English people moving over to America and basically eradicating through disease and genocide and war the native communities. It's a horrendous thing to have happened in history. Doesn't get talked about enough. It gets swept under the rug. People still celebrate Christopher Columbus Day, which they really shouldn't. And basically it provides a narrative of Ned very much integrating as much as he can with the native community and working with them and learning from them. He learns their language, he learns how to kind of fish a little bit, like in the way that the native community fish. He learns how to plant their plants and tend gardens in their way, and this, that and the other. And he really is very, very staunchly supportive of the native communities, and is kind of somebody who's kind of pulled in two directions from the British / American communities that had set up in New England and the native communities that he feels much more drawn towards. And I loved that narrative. I don't know enough about it, so apologies if the narrative is a little bit light in topic. Yeah, I thought it was a nice way for Philippa Gregory to talk about that topic within the character of Ned and within the scope of the story. A lot of people that have reviewed Dark Tides have said that they didn't like the Ned storyline because it had no relation to the storyline that was happening in London. But I suspect that the third book in the series may feature more of Ned's story next time around. So I think that's why he's featured quite a lot in the second book. And I just loved it. Again, he's in a small community. He's going into nature quite a lot. He's talking about gardening. He's talking about, you know, setting up a home. He's working very much within the landscape, within nature. And I think that really appealed to me as part of this book when I was reading it in December. And yeah, that, to be honest, Ned's story saved this book for me because I was really disappointed with the general storyline, the kind of main storyline. Didn't like it at all. I thought it was unbelievable. I thought the characters didn't necessarily behave in believable ways, and the parts in Venice were just like something from a Carry On film, to be honest. Like, I mean, maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. Maybe I'm being a bit too harsh on this one, but there's some things that happen and you just think, that would never happen in real life. And I know it's a fiction book. I know it's a fiction. Tom gets very frustrated with me when I talk about films and I'm like, that's not believable. And he's like, it's a movie, Charlotte, just watch it. But for me, I like my narratives to be somewhat believable, to be able to say, I can understand how that would happen, or they have to be completely the other end of the spectrum. You know, it has to be magic, it has to be something like that. Like we were just talking with Bone China, I didn't mind that there were fairies in her book because it was like completely, you're talking about topics to start with that are questioned whether they exist or not, and that's fine. But basically one of the characters goes to Venice to try and find someone, and the person meets someone and just instantly goes and stays at their house and is not taken advantage of, is not, you know, nothing really happens. And I was waiting for something. I was like, surely that person wouldn't just go into someone's house and not question it. And then there's a point where somebody's in prison and they have to go and try and get the person out of prison. They just walk into somewhere and explain the situation. They're like, oh, all right, well, we'll let him go, but actually turns out he's actually on this island. And so they're like, oh, well, you can't get him anymore. So they get on a boat, and then the character jumps off this boat to go and rescue this person in the middle of the ocean. I mean, it's not the ocean, it's like the lagoon, you know, the lagoons around Venice. And I was just like, oh, for goodness sake, like, don't be lazy with the narrative. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry, because I don't want to make a video about a book that I don't like and that come back and bite me in the arse like 3 years down the line when, you know, something happens and someone's like, well, we liked you until you gave that scathing review of that book. And I'll be like, oh shit, didn't mean to do that. But I also want to be honest. I'm not going to sit here and say that a book was phenomenal if personally I didn't like it. And obviously all of this is just my opinion, but I just thought, I like the ideas that Gregory's coming up with at this point. I like the idea of them being female-led narratives. I think they're fantastic that way. But I just think that it needed more depth. The characters needed more depth. They needed more believability. I feel like it was all condensed, and so therefore you didn't really get time to really develop proper thoughts about it. And so everyone was a little bit two-dimensional. That's kind of what I think with it, without revealing too much about what it's about, too much of the plot. I was just overall, my expectations were kind of up here, and I feel like it delivered like there. So to be honest, I'm going to give this a 2 out of 5. I know that sounds a really harsh review. I would give it a 3, but I think I've given other books a 3 that, to be honest, were better written than this. So I think I have to give this a 2, but maybe a high 2 out of 5, because it is still a good book. And I think I probably will read it again. I'm going to keep it. And like I said, the Ned narrative, I really loved. I really liked that. I really hope that Ned features in the next book in the series, because I'd really like to see what happens to his character and what happens with the kind of American narrative. I thought that was fantastic. So I will be reading the next one. I'm going to continue with the series. Philippa Gregory, she's a great writer. You know, and I've read other stuff. I mean, bloody hell, The Other Boleyn Girl was the first book that I ever read of hers, and I loved that. I actually did my undergraduate dissertation at university on Philippa Gregory's novels. So I am a huge fan of Philippa Gregory. So I don't necessarily want this to be really, really negative and this, that and the other, because I do really like her as a writer. I was just a little bit disappointed in this particular book. So yes, bloody hell, this film has probably almost been an hour, this video. I don't know, I'm going to have to cut it down, but I feel like I've actually done quite well at trying to stick to talking about the stories that I've actually read. So I promise that I will not read that many books in a month again for a while. I really enjoyed reading all of those books throughout December. I hope you've enjoyed following along and kind of listening to what I thought of all those books. Do go and support those writers and buy their books if you are interested in them. Again, follow me on Instagram if you're not already following me. I will be being a lot more active over there over the next few months. So yeah, I will see you all again in another fortnight, and if you want to talk to me in the meantime, come and join me over on Instagram. Hope you're all okay. As always, if you're struggling with mental health issues, if you're struggling in any way at the moment, please do reach out. Talk to me, talk to a friend, talk to a family member. We are living in the most horrendous times at the moment. Life is you know, I think the most difficult that a lot of us will have experienced before. So don't suffer in silence, do come and talk. I have had my own mental health issues in the past, so I know where you're coming from, and yeah, reach out if you want to. If not, I'll see you again in the very near future. Have a lovely day, and I'll see you soon. Bye guys.